Hello, name's Alan, welcome back to the channel, thank you very much for tuning in. Today we'll be making a tier list for which it is necessary to establish certain rule sets. Hence, I will briefly introduce my preface regarding elemental advantages, as well as the tier list evaluation criteria. So, let's get into it. Fire, in my opinion, is the strongest element in Wizard of Legend due to items like Ebonwolf's Cloak, Stanza of Flames, or Neve's Ruby specifically supporting fire damage, as well as abilities generally having an insane amount of base damage, a usually accompanying fire debuff dealing a decent chunk of damage very quickly, and a very high signature charge gain for extra damage across the board. Lightning and water or ice are the second strongest elements due to strong supportive items like Ebonwolf's Cloak or Neve's Citrine, as well as for ice, Stanza of Frost, Special Snowflake, Pandemic Pouch, and the Fuzzy Hand Warmers. Lightning pairs up very well with base damage increases and critical hit builds, while water is very strong for projectile destruction, healing, and crowd control with the Frost debuff. Earth is second to last due to poison taking too long to apply damage and generally doing a poor job of stun locking enemies. Additionally, most Earth abilities rely on crowd control, are rather slow to use, and therefore not very good into bosses. Wind, in my book, is clearly the worst element due to a huge lack of base damage on most wind abilities. Additionally, slow is the worst debuff as it does not damage, kill, nor stunlock enemies and has a rather niche use of creating space between you and your foes. Wind abilities generally are very clunky or have to be used from point blank range, making them even worse in that regard. Wind abilities generally are better when used as a supportive ability for applying slows, destroying projectiles, repelling or moving enemies, and for granting movement speed or cooldown reduction to yourself. We will be evaluating our tier list today using the following criteria in order. Ability category, useful item or Arcana synergies, base damage or effective damage dealt, coverage in terms of width and range, signature charge generation, ease of use and unique quirks, projectile destruction capabilities, and finally, status effect applications. Hi guys, we made it. I'd say let's continue on with the tier list scheme, which is fairly default looking. At the very top we have the dreaded S tier, reserved for only the best of the best, the creme de la creme, the universally good and awesome. We love to see these. These go with everything like a fine wine. Followed up by the A tier for the above average, the good and the great. Followed up by the B tier, which is anything remotely considered decent or quite average. C tier is a little bit lackluster, below average or meh if you like short terms, and then finally D tier is for anything that is considered to be of poor quality that you wouldn't want to get your hands on generally speaking, or that has quite a niche to fill. Let's leave it at that. Additionally, I added an I don't know tier for anything that I lack the personal experience of giving my refined opinion on, or anything that I simply do not use whatsoever and therefore I don't have an opinion on. I may or may not state an opinion here occasionally on separate abilities, however, it is merely a guess and not one coming from a great amount of experience. Additionally, as a side note, we will be going through these icons, we will be going through these abilities in-game order, i.e. starting with the fire element and then going through element-wise from left to right throughout the in-game Wizard of Legend Arcana book, whereas here these have been inserted in alphabetical order. Some of these images, which I can assure you are perfectly square in my personal image assets folders, have been squashed beyond recognition, so this is going to be quite fun. I'll definitely have to look through this list here and find the individual abilities by heart. This is going to be quite interesting. That having been said, with all that other way, I'd say let's get started. Let's start with Flame Strike. Flame Strike is a charged melee basic Arcana, which pairs up decently well with the combo gloves, which are great for any charge-based ability that has an oomph to its charged use. Chrono Glove, which is great for any charged ability because it allows for you to use that thing way more freely, way more quickly, and thereby in a lot more situations. In different situations, it makes the tool a lot more versatile, so I love that. Flak Gauntlet in this particular case, as it is a melee ability, you can quickly tap it. Unlike other charge-based abilities, it comes out fairly quickly and in a rather wide area around you, so it will easily take care of large amounts of projectiles for you. Evening Gloves, likewise, definitely comparable to the Chrono Glove, are quite neat for this ability, both for tapping it faster and for simply chugging it in here and there for different situations. And Dark Katana finally here to top it all off, which you will hear me mention a lot. Dark Katana is incredibly busted on any melee ability as it triples your crit chance for melee abilities. Thereby, whenever an ability deals already decent or even greater amounts of damage, Dark Katana capitalizes on that and makes that ability go to the moon and beyond. The unenhanced version of this particular Arcana features a very high amount of base damage, great coverage in my opinion, decent signature charge generation, and most importantly it's very easy to use, and it can be tapped for quick stuns, which is definitely not standard for charged abilities. Whereas the enhanced version destroys projectiles additionally on the final blast and burns enemies again on the final blast for a lot of extra versatility, a lot of extra crowd control, and a lot of extra damage with the burn. It's just so freaking good. This thing is S tier all the way. I love using it. It's super versatile. It goes with any build, both as a defensive tool, as an offensive tool, as a tool used for versatility, for crowd control, or for single target damage. This can do it all depending on your build. You only need a handful of items and preferably to get that enhancement and you're good to go. Moving on to the Fire Yo-Yo, which should be this asset right here, which is a held projectile basic Arcana. That means, similarly to the Flame Strike, you hold down a button to use it. However, with the Flame Strike and generally charged abilities, generally abilities for especially basic Arcana in this game have a 3-hit pattern, so you have 2 weaker hits and 1 stronger hit. That is especially true for charged abilities, where the 2 weaker hits are even weaker and the stronger hit is generally much stronger, so you always want to get that huge hit off, which forces you to wait it out. But for simple held Arcana, it's not that critical to let it essentially proceed all the way. You simply chug it in, right? You simply use the Fire Yo-Yo and roughly all hits will deal the same damage in roughly any given situation. So held Arcana, while they have a slightly lower damage output, I'd say, in the optimal cases, right, compared to the charged abilities, a lot more flexible in how you use them right out of the gates. This thing still, regardless, combos up quite neatly with the combo gloves to add a little bit of extra poke damage. The evening gloves, so you can use it even more frequently and even longer, which is lovely. The reinforced bracers, as it has an okay range, and these are projectiles, so they can easily take care of other projectiles for you. You can even play bodyguard with this thing, as it has a fairly long range in case you're playing with a noob in multiplayer, for example, right? You can easily safeguard them. Candies, I would say, are definitely noteworthy for this ability, as it is by all manners of the word decent by any means, really. So candies just add onto it, they add a little bit of extra damage, a little bit of extra crowd control. I'd say they are definitely noteworthy. And Field Berserk, likewise, especially for held abilities, more so than for charged abilities, is especially effective on these. You can literally just hold down a button and Field Berserk will lead you to the moon and beyond. The unenhanced version of this ability has a decent amount of base damage. It lacks coverage and range a little bit anyway. especially width-wise. This isn't a great ability. You really have to position yourself appropriately. It's essentially a line-based skill shot, though a little wider than a straight-up line. So you definitely have to line up a bunch of enemies. That is especially true for a lot of other abilities here coming right up. We are essentially just going through the essential different parts, the unique parts, the unique kinds of basic Arcana here one by one. Fire Yo-Yo being a held projectile, narrow line skill shot. Additionally, it does grant you a great amount of signature charge generation, which is amazing. Love to see that. And right out of the gates, poor projectile destruction, as this is after all a projectile. You don't need reinforced braces for this to destroy other projectiles. Projectiles generally destroy other projectiles and get destroyed in the process, but let's not talk about that. At least it can do this for you, which is nice to know. The enhanced version of it hits faster and at longer range, so it simply removes those weaknesses of the unenhanced version. This thing is, by any means, it's good. It's not decent, I'd say. It's definitely more than decent. You can win any run with this. You can play any run with this. You don't necessarily need to enhance it. It's still gonna be decently great. Whereas the Flame Strike, on the other hand, you never need to enhance this. Period. It's insanely strong, even the base version. But Fire Yo-Yo, it's good. It definitely works for you in any given run. Moving on to the Flame Cross, which is another held undefined basic Arcana, i.e. it is neither melee nor projectile, so a lot of items like the Dark Attire, like Reinforced Braces, like the mentioned Flak Gauntlet cannot even be used on this. That means I have to bump it down a few points already before even looking into it. Looking at synergies here, combo gloves work decently well, evening gloves definitely work for this one too, and candies are alright, though it doesn't really have any particular synergies standing out for this ability. I wouldn't even consider this a main damage tool, to be totally frank, as the unenhanced version, while it does have decent damage, it really lacks coverage. It does grant you a decent amount of signature charge, but it is incredibly hard to hit, especially while near walls, as you have to essentially aim in an X shape, in an X formation, and when you're next to a wall, you could lose up to half of the damage you deal, half of this X strike, as it starts on the outside of your character. Right, so while adjacent to a wall, it starts inside of the wall, i.e. the whole thing is just deleted. So this thing, especially the unenhanced version, it leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. When enhanced, it hits faster and at longer range, which is nice. It doesn't really help the X shape by any means, but the range increase does still feel good overall. I would say this thing is average or even below average. For now, it's a fire element, so it does gain a lot of benefits simply from being of one of the strongest elements in this game. There's a lot of fire support. I am thinking meh, but you can definitely make it work. It's kind of hard, arguably, to convince myself here to put it into average or decent tier, as it can be very hard to crowd control large groups of enemies with this. Whereas with the Fire Yo-Yo, it's very easy to line up enemies, as it is essentially a line skill shot. The X shape here makes things a little more difficult, so I will put it in meh. Moving on to Bouncing Blaze. A beautiful ability, I love this one. It is a tapped projectile basic Arcana, i.e. every time you tap it, you shoot. You can't hold it for it to shoot automatically for you. You have to tap it manually, which can make you go crazy if you have a lot of attack speed, i.e. in other words, you have items that synergize with it, such as the Evening Gloves, which allow you to tap faster, shooting this out essentially as fast as you can tap. Of course, there's that's a gross oversimplification, but tapped abilities are kind of a pain in the ass, especially if you are playing on a controller. I find myself not liking them very much. It's just very tedious having to tap it down every time, whereas other abilities I can simply hold and they do all the work for me. Or the heavy lifting, I simply have to aim and that's it. Here I have to tap like a lunatic. The reinforced braces also work decently well. This is a projectile with quite the width, quite the range, so it is nice to use reinforced braces to destroy the occasional projectile, especially when enhancing this ability. Candies can definitely work if this is supposed to be a main damaging tool. Likewise, the Chaos Visor can do a lot for this ability. Chaos Visor raises the crit chance of any ranged ability, so it's sort of the way weaker cousin of the Dark Katana. It only slightly raises your crit chance. It doesn't triple it straight up or double it or anything like that. It's not nearly as crazy, but it's gonna do a lot of work for this particular Arcana, as it does have a decent amount of base damage, quite a lot actually, and slapping a bit of crit chance on it essentially means that occasionally you will get a lot of extra damage out of your already very high damage ability. The unenhanced version, like I just mentioned, features a high amount of base damage. It lacks coverage, and it only grants a very poor amount of signature charge every time you use and connect it. It is, however, great for occasional poke damage. Has quite the range. It bounces across pits, which is quite funny to look at, but it can only ever hit one target as the unenhanced version, which is a huge downside. That's why you cannot possibly use this as your main damage tool for large crowded rooms very early on when this is unenhanced, and you wouldn't want to. This may deal very high damage, but it's just so tough to use against large groups of enemies. The enhanced version, on the other hand, solves all these problems, piercing all enemies hit. This is incredible. You want the enhancement every time, and it makes this ability much stronger, unless of course you need for this to be your single target damage tool. Against bosses, then the pierce doesn't do much for you. Generally, I would still recommend getting the enhancement ASAP. This thing is average, I would say. I would love to put it in great, it's just not though. You cannot use this for crowd control early on. I mean, you could, but you kind of have to position a lot more with this than with other abilities, so I cannot possibly justify putting this any higher. Moving on to the next element, starting things off with Wind Slash. Wind Slash is a hailed melee basic Arcana. Combos up with the combo gloves, especially when enhanced, evening gloves, especially when enhanced, Dark Katana, especially when enhanced, and the base version, or the enhancement, combo up especially nicely with Fueled Berserk and Evading Zephyr. As you move while using this ability, Evading Zephyr is a nice addition. When you're already hacking away using a Fueled Berserk like a complete lunatic, you're moving all across the place, so just slap an Evading Zephyr on top of that if you can afford it. It's quite an expensive Arcana, likewise to the Fueled Berserk. If you can afford it, Evading Zephyr is great, so you can literally just go nuts and be completely invulnerable in the process, evading all the damage you would take, all the crowd control thrown your way. But even for the base version, Evading Zephyr can be useful. I just wouldn't recommend buying it outright, as this is likely not going to be your main damage tool, especially when unenhanced, as the unenhanced version has a decent amount of base damage, but that's about all good I can tell you about it. It lacks coverage a lot, it grants you a very poor amount of signature charge generation, and it is very easy to be circled and overwhelmed using this ability. It's just such a tiny range. It's like you are literally beating the enemies with your arms, which I'm pretty sure is actually what this ability does, and that's absolutely what it feels like. You kind of hit them with a wet noodle in at a very tiny range, so getting circled with this one, getting cornered, and literally having to face a wall with your backside is quite normal when using this. Usually I would recommend just get into a corner and let the enemies climb up in front of you, let them somewhat line up and then go to town on them, or just use better abilities that deal high damage like your other abilities that are not your basic Arcana. After all, basic Arcana are here to either do the heavy lifting in terms of buying time and all your other abilities are on cooldown, of generating a large amount of signature charge for you, or of straight up killing enemies and eviscerating entire rooms and crowd controlling everyone. This ability in particular kind of sucks at all those things, but also it is still fairly mediocre. I would say it is below average, but only slightly so. I would probably still consider this average, it's just a little clunky to use it. When enhanced, it only deals a bit of extra damage and has more coverage, and it looks a lot cooler, but overall it doesn't really change anything about this particular ability. It doesn't fall out of its role, still fills the same role just as decently well, or as below average well. Next is Severing Slash, which is a charged melee basic Arcana. Severing Slash combines decently well with Combo Gloves and the Chrono Glove, as it is a charged Arcana, so you just get a little bit of extra value from it. Evening Gloves are quite neat for this one, as I personally find myself tapping with this a lot more than actually trying to charge it. I like charging because it moves you forward quite a lot, and it grants you quite a lot of knockback on enemies, so you can easily shove large groups of enemies into pits. It's essentially one glorified wind gust that shoves them for a short distance, hopefully into a pit. So all of the above, Combo Gloves, Chrono Glove, and Evening Gloves, I personally use to try to shove enemies faster and more efficiently, whereas the Evening Gloves I can also use to try to get a little bit of extra damage in. I don't generally consider this ability to be worth charging to get the damage off. I prefer just tapping it, so Evening Gloves definitely is my favorite here. Flat Gauntlet also arguably works. You have quite the cleave ability on the final charge, so you can definitely get rid of projectiles, and I find myself getting interrupted when using this ability quite a lot, so Flat Gauntlet just seems like a logical choice here. Evading Zephyr is also quite decent, as this ability does sort of force you to move quite a lot, similarly to the Wind Slash, where it's less mandatory, I'd say, but still a possibility here. It is quite mandatory that you move a lot with this ability. It quite literally forces you to move quite a great distance, so Evading Zephyr does just help you to not be hit, to not be interrupted so often while moving around. The unenhanced version of this ability has a very poor amount of base damage. Decent coverage, absolutely. Grants you a poor amount of signature charge generation, and it is rather easy to use. Except it isn't really. The coverage is alright. Well, it may be alright once you actually get to use the full blast at the end here. When you don't get to do that regularly, the coverage is meager at best, and it's not that easy to use, and especially not that easy to crowd control large groups of enemies with. When enhanced, it gains a lot more coverage, but essentially this ability just suffers from a great lack of damage, and therefore it is nigh unusable. I'm sorry, I really want to like you, and I've played a lot with you recently. However, I've come to the conclusion that you're just really not worth the time, Severing Slash, so unfortunately I'll have to drop you off in the poop tier. Moving on to something a lot more delightful. Espina, my favorite basic Arcana in this game by a landslide. It is a tapped projectile basic Arcana. It pairs up exceptionally well with Combo Gloves. It's lovely that it essentially doubles the damage of the final hit, which is very, very nice. No, that was very poor wording actually. So you throw it around this one disc at a time, right? And on the final hit, on the third hit, you always throw both discs, essentially dealing double damage. And with this, you quadruple your damage on that final hit. That very crucial, very important final hit. So you always want to use all 3 hits here on this particular ability anyway, as you can. There is nothing ever shutting you down. There is no reason to ever just use the regular taps and not just tap it all the way through to the 3rd hit. So Combo Gloves is fantastic. Evening Gloves are likewise absolutely amazing, allowing you to just spam away. I know tapped abilities are kind of a pain in the ass for your fingers, most importantly, and your temper, but this ability is just so freaking good and fun to use that I am willing to slap Evening Gloves on it, I'm willing to slap Combo Gloves on it, and just spam away forever, hurt my fingers for my own amusement. It's amazing. Reinforced braces, likewise, are quite great. This is a projectile basic Arcana for some unknown reason. So, by default, these projectiles destroy other projectiles and get destroyed in the process. Slapping reinforced braces on these makes them not get destroyed in that process. That's awesome. Although, keep in mind that this ability essentially covers, while it may cover your immediate range around your character, the timing is also a lot harder to get right. You have to essentially destroy projectiles while they are already so close to you that they might just hit, that they might just connect, that you might not be able to spin that one tiny little discus around you fast enough to a point where it could connect to that projectile and destroy it or disrupt it from damaging you. Field Berserk is absolutely insane on this one. I love it so much. If I recall correctly, you can just straight up hold down the button as well. Though I'm not sure. I think you... I don't really know. I will revoke that same. I think you still have to tap a lot. I don't know. I have played with Air Spinner so much that I don't really notice it anymore. I don't really remember its ins and outs. I just perform them. It's sight knowledge at this point. I'm not very aware of what I'm doing. It's subconscious, right? That's the word. Evading Zephyr is quite neat with this one, as it allows for you to move around a lot, although it is not a necessity. It's just a nice addition. When unenhanced, Air Spinner features a high amount of base damage, great coverage in a 360-degree angle around your character, precisely. It lacks range, yeah, quite a lot for a projectile, or a supposed projectile basic Arcana. This thing doesn't have range whatsoever. It's immediate melee range, literally as melee as it gets. However, it grants you a decent amount of signature charge generation. It's very easy to use, versatile, and can hit enemies multiple times. Every single disc you fling can hit enemies multiple times as they fly around your character for long enough to do that occasionally. You may not be intentionally trying to get that to happen, but it will happen. It does happen pretty much all the time. Also, it grants you a decent amount of projectile destruction out of the bat. The enhanced version of Air Spinner features much more base damage, as you essentially always throw out 2 discs at once, which kind of renders combo gloves obsolete, but it's still absolutely insane, mind-bogglingly fun to use. Grants you much more coverage therefore, and better projectile destruction as well. This thing is going into S tier all the way, definitely above Flame Strike for me. It's much easier to use, especially the unenhanced version is just so good. You never need to enhance this fully. It's just a massive upside, probably the greatest enhancement among all the abilities on this list. You have to get this. You really want this, not because this ability otherwise doesn't work, but because it's just so goddamn good. You really want it every time. Moving on to Perforating Jet. Perforating Jet is a held projectile basic Arcana. Pairs up decently well with Evening Gloves, Reinforced Bracers, as these things travel quite slowly and have quite the range, so it's easy for you to catch the occasional projectiles and play Bodyguard again, and Fueled Berserk, so you can essentially hold it down permanently. However, even with these items, the unenhanced version deals poor damage, very poor base damage at a very long range, arguably, but still incredibly poor base damage. Doesn't really get any better from any items that I could mention here. While it does hit at a very long range, it's a very narrow, long line skill shot, which absolutely lacks width. It should definitely have been made a little bit wider. It's very hard to hit enemies with this. It grants you a poor amount of signature charge generation. It's clunky and very sluggish to use, kind of forces you to stand still in place, and it grants you a tiny bit of extra poor projectile destruction. I should add on top of that, it's not that easy to destroy projectiles with this thing. When enhanced, on the flip side, it deals much more damage, and it grants you a decent amount of signature charge, but this ability doesn't get a whole lot better when you upgrade it. This has no other place than below average, and I would consider it worse than this very range lackluster ability, this melee ability, because even though Perforating Jet does have a lot of range, the damage here, it's kind of hard to hit in the first place even when enhanced, and the damage here isn't as great. It doesn't excel, it doesn't really scale as well as for melee abilities generally, especially the Wind Slash, I believe it's called, right? Moving on to Earth Knuckles right here. Earth Knuckles is a tapped melee basic Arcana, which pairs up exceptionally well with the gloves, which is funny because this is a literal fist. I just love that. It's just so funny to think about. The evening gloves just allow you to hit with this a lot more frequently, as generally you would kind of train yourself to use this in a certain rhythm to be able to not be interrupted by enemies and to constantly stun lock them. Evening gloves just allow for that to be a lot easier. Dark Katana is amazing. It is immediate ability with a lot of base damage. So Dark Katana is just so freaking good. You want it every time. Fueled Berserk is amazing and super funny. You just turn into a like a raging wrestler or something. You just constantly, a boxer rather, punching at your enemies. Just such fun to look at. And Evading Zephyr is a neat addition on top, although again not exceptionally useful with the base version without any other tools at your disposal. The unenhanced version of this Arcana features very high base damage, but quite a poor coverage. It's literally just a small fist in front of your character, right? So it is comparable to any and all of these other melee abilities here, but maybe at a slightly shorter range. It does grant you a great amount of signature charge when you use it, which is fantastic, because you only use this occasionally. You can only use this occasionally. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't really use this very frequently to hit enemies often and ramp up your signature, but you have to really just hit occasionally, like with the Bouncing Blaze, and then you get a large burst of signature charge from it, which is very, very nice. Actually, I think I prefer that method or that methodology over something like the Fire Yo-Yo, for example, which hits many times, only grants you tiny amounts of signature charge, so you have to stand there and hit enemies a whole lot more, and when there's simply not a lot of enemies that you can hit, you're kinda screwed. Whereas with this fist, you just hit them once or twice, and you're good to go. That's a lot of signature charge for you. It is very clunky, and it takes some getting used to. As I said, you have to essentially hit enemies in a certain 1-2 pause rhythm. When enhanced, it deals a lot more damage, has a lot more coverage. It has it grants you a lot more signature charge generation. It is slower to use, and the rhythm changes up entirely. You definitely have to know it. You definitely have to get used to that. And it grants you ultimate projectile destruction. It's just so good. Destroys all projectiles in the immediate vicinity of this fist. So cool. It's so good. It also features a great amount of knockback beside all these other cool traits. This thing I wouldn't put quite an S tier, as it is a little bit clunky to use, so it's gonna go at the top of A tier for now. It's just so strong, albeit very clunky, but that's typically a very Earth thing, right? To be clunky and slow, but very mighty. Moving on to the Bladed Vine, which is a held melee basic Arcana. Pairs up well with the combo gloves, exceptionally well when enhanced. Evening gloves are quite alright with this one. Flat Gauntlet is quite alright with this one, especially when enhanced, I'd say, as this does persist for quite a long time every time you use it. You don't just flick a bunch of rocks at enemies very quickly, but you have these sort of long-lasting vines lashing out from your character, reaching out, and they can destroy projectiles for the entire time that they are up, right? So Flat Gauntlet is a great match. Candies are quite alright. This is your main damage tool, your main crowd control tool, which this ability in particular I use a lot for as my main crowd control tool. Dark Katana is quite alright, adds a little bit of damage, and Fueled Berserk likewise adds a little bit of damage, especially when enhanced. I like to add a Fueled Berserk to this ability. When unenhanced, it has a decent amount of base damage, a decent coverage, decent signature charge generation, and it is quite easy to use, especially for large groups of enemies, as it pierces all enemies, and the final hit in the chain has a slightly extended range with, I believe, slightly more damage dealt. When enhanced, it deals a lot more damage and has a lot more coverage. It is, however, a little bit clunky to use. It suffers from the same syndrome as Earth Knuckles, where with the base version I have an easy rhythm to follow, and with the enhanced version that rhythm is slightly delayed, or it doesn't work out as simply as before. So keep that in mind when enhancing it, that while it may deal more damage, while it may have more coverage, it will be slightly harder to use and utilize without taking damage and being interrupted occasionally. Bladed Vine is at the very least a good ability, if not great. I'd say overall it's better than Fire Yo-Yo. I do feel like it has more range, I do feel like it deals more damage more consistently, like it's very, very easy. It's absolute child's play to control large groups of enemies with this ability. although it doesn't have the greatest single target damage, but you can definitely tickle out a lot of power out of this one. You can squeeze it out with a bunch of additions like candies and a Field Berserk to get it there eventually. Moving on to the Obsidian Splitter, a very interesting ability. It is a charged melee basic arcana, which combines exceptionally well with all of the following synergies. Sorry, did I say the following? I meant the following. Combo Gloves, because you deal insane damage with this ability when you actually get to charge it all the way. And Combo Gloves deals insane damage times 2. That is probably the highest damage out of all the abilities on this list. Easily. Not even a big deal. Chrono Glove is very, very mandatory for this ability. You quite literally have to use a Chrono Glove to enable yourself to use this ability sorrow free, otherwise this is going to be very, very tough to use. Evening Gloves help you out a tiny bit with that aforementioned issue of slowness and sturdiness. Flak Gauntlet again helps you out not being interrupted mid-channeling. Dark Katana just potentially adds a boatload of damage on top. And Field Berserk actually, as a side note, helps you to essentially negate the status, the categorization of this ability as a charged ability and just straight up hold it for a little bit of damage, right? You are compromising not being able to charge it fully, but instead you'll be able to actually get damage off at a large range. But let's actually look into the specifics. This ability, when unenhanced, has very, very high base damage. It has great coverage at a fat cleave in front of your character, essentially covering a full 180 degrees in front of your character model. It's so freaking good. It's the de facto cleave in this game, I'd say. It grants you a decent amount of signature art generation, which is great, because here's the thing why this ability is not great, and why it isn't used widely. It's very clunky and sluggish. Both clunky and sluggish. You heard me right. This thing is so weird to use. It's very hard to find situations to use it in the first place, to get it to charge all the way so you get that damage hit off, and it is so incredibly slow. You have like 4 seconds or so, at least that's what it feels like, for enemies to interrupt you or just straight up walk away out of the LOS of you, out of the range of where you are aiming. It's very depressing. I really want to use this more. It is incredibly overpowered. It would be incredibly overpowered if you could use it slightly faster. So slap a Chrono Glove on it and it might actually be usable. Evening Gloves alone, unfortunately, I feel like they are simply not enough. You actually need a Chrono Glove for this ability to be worth it. Field Berserk is quite funny as it turns you into this raging lumberjack, but it still only will deal, I'd say, high amount of base damage, or maybe even just a decent amount of base damage, as Field Berserk disables you from using the charge part of this ability. It does grant you a great amount of projectile destruction on the final hit. I'm not sure that is still true. I did try around with this a lot, and this is kind of a trivia fact that I found out, which I legitimately cannot tell if this is true or whether I was just tripping. So maybe check that for yourself. It kind of sounds weird. So only on that final hit, that sort of explosion where it goes back into the earth, will it destroy projectiles. When enhanced, it deals much more damage, even more damage, and has much more coverage, and this fat explosion once it explodes. Super good enhancement damage wise, but utility wise and ease of use wise, this thing is an absolute nightmare. This is as bad as it gets in the game, not just in its particular category of basic arcana or charged abilities. This thing, it starts right here and it rapidly falls down the ladder to below average, unfortunately. This thing could be A or even S tier all the way. It's just so sluggish, unfortunately. Moving on to Stone Shot. Stone Shot is a held projectile basic arcana, which combos up decently well with the combo gloves, as it functions essentially, it's essentially a one-on-one copy of Fire Yo-Yo. It's just the earthen take on it. So combo gloves adds a lot of extra chip damage. This thing can be especially useful to poke at enemies, to use occasionally for extra damage, to bait enemies, to push them into pits. It's quite versatile, a lot more versatile than the Fire Yo-Yo. Fire Yo-Yo relies on essentially you standing still and then flinging this out, and it's coming back to you, and you need to catch it essentially like a boomerang, right, to ditch your damage out. Whereas the Stone Shot, you literally just throw a bunch of pebbles at your enemies, so it's a lot more flexible. It's easily retargetable. I really like it a lot personally. Evening gloves are also a great match for it, because then you can just fling out rocks all that much faster. Reinforced bases are quite alright. I wouldn't say super essential by any means. Candies are great as you can target them into multiple directions, and this ability I at least personally use a lot as my main damage tool. It's just very fun to use, so candies are a great fit. Similarly, Fueled Berserk, Evading Zephyr, and Sidewinder's Batch. If this is supposed to be a main damage tool, Fueled Berserk is incredible. Fueled Berserk in conjunction with Sidewinder's Batch is just the best. It deals an insane amount of damage. Sidewinder's Batch might be the candidate for the most busted helper relic here, the most busted synergy in all of the basic Arcana category. It's just so freaking good. Evading Zephyr is just the cherry on top, that you can actually do that you can actually move while doing all this with a Fueled Berserk and just picking apart everything. It turns you into a little living machine gun of pebbles. It's so freaking good. The unenhanced version has a decent amount of damage, a decent amount of coverage. It lacks width, but it can hit multiple targets, especially on that final slightly larger rock, which sort of explodes, I guess, up the face of your enemies. It is quite decent at granting you signature charge. It is easy to use and very versatile, and it grants you a decent amount of projectile destruction right out the gates. You throw multiple projectiles, you can throw them into multiple directions, so it's easy to destroy upcoming projectiles flying your way. When enhanced, it deals much more damage and has much better projectile destruction, therefore much better AoE capabilities as well, for not just attacking tiny groups of enemies or very narrowly clumped up groups of enemies or single enemies straight up, but you can focus down larger groups of enemies much more easily with this tool, which is otherwise mostly a single target damage tool, I would say. Stone Shot for me has to go all the way up here. Probably actually right here, as the synergy with already considered to be very overpowered abilities like Fueled Berserk is just out of this world. It is so freaking good. I would absolutely 100 out of 100 times prefer the synergy of Stone Shot plus Fueled Berserk over Stone Fist plus Fueled Berserk, even though Stone Fist just looks that much funnier, as this one is actually so freaking good and applicable to any given situation, any given build as well. I love this thing. Let's move on to the lightning elements, starting things off with Spark Contact. Spark Contact is a held melee basic Arcana. It is incredibly strong with combo gloves, as they actually add a ton of damage, what you probably wouldn't expect of this ability. Evening gloves are quite strong with this one too. Flat Gauntlet can definitely work for you, although I'm not a big fan of doing that, but it allows for you to just go that much more ham and completely disregard projectiles flying your way, as long as you are somewhat facing them. You can't just straight up ignore them at a 90-degree angle, for example, because they will definitely hit you. You will at least have to quickly turn around a little bit to get rid of them with a Flat Gauntlet, and this thing has quite a tiny range. It essentially extends slightly from your character, I would say, whereas Stone Fist has like Stone Fist or the Wind Slash have above an arm's range from your character. This is more like fingernails or toenails of range from your character, so it can be very hard to destroy projectiles with Lullaby with a Flat Gauntlet. It's just a nice addition when you want to go ham with this thing, because turns out this thing is incredibly busted with candies, Dark Katana, Fueled Berserk, Evading Zephyr, and Sidewinder's Batch. The standard, most overpowered basic Arcana build, highest DPS basic Arcana build, highest versatility build, just straight up do everything, evade everything, kill everything, whether it be AoE, whether it be single targets, but especially for killing single targets, this ability is just irreplaceable. It is incredible. Sidewinder's Badge, which was already quite amazing for the Stone Shot, is that much more overpowered on this ability. Field Berserk with this ability may be the most broken combination of abilities in this game, for PvE anyway. Dark Katana adds a ton of damage, and Candies likewise, because your ultimate goal is to slap Evening Gloves or Field Berserk onto this, are amazing. Absolutely outstanding. The unenhanced version of this features very high base damage, especially against knockback immune targets with a Field Berserk. It, although, has a very poor coverage. It is a melee ability after all, which is fine. It grants you a great amount of signature charge generation, which is just why? Just why? This thing is already so busted damage-wise. Why does it add so much signature charge? It's very easy to use, and when enhanced, additionally shocks enemies. That may not sound like a lot, but try this out, and I will promise you, you will not be disappointed. I used to never want to play with this. I heard from someone they really love this. They really believe it's like the highest damage thing in the game. I tried it out for myself, and I saw for myself that indeed they spoke truth. This thing is busted. Top of the top, very top. If I could, I would make an extra tier just for this one. It's so freaking good. It may not be very versatile in how you use it against large groups of enemies, because it lacks range, but it makes up for all the wrong things with simple boss killing potential. There is no other ability on this list that can get remotely close to the boss killing potential that this thing will grant you. Except, of course, for the contender after our next contender, but we'll get to that in a second here. Let's continue on with Radiant Blast, which is a charged melee basic Arcana. Combos up okay with combo gloves for a slightly larger blast. It's just a glorified Flame Strike, although it doesn't really work nearly as well as Flame Strike, doesn't have as much of an explosive power as Flame Strike either, pun intended, to hold back large groups of enemies at bay. Unfortunately, while this is an AoE blasting type of ability, the blast is very round and therefore very short ranged. So combo gloves do add a little bit of damage, evening gloves add a little bit of damage and versatility. Candies, you could go for that, yeah, let's not though, this is not a main damage tool, let's not be kidding around here. Chrono Glove, not sure I've mentioned that, is quite okay for this one as well, although it is not as great as for Flame Strike, as this blast simply lacks range, so you have to be very close to enemies, learn the map manually and stuff, and only then will the Chrono Glove be quite helpful at ditching out more damage. Otherwise you're just blasting but you're not hitting anything, right? Flak Gauntlet can definitely be decent for this one, as well as I feel this is quite a long winded up ability, right? You use this for a long time, it feels like it never ends, so Flak Gauntlet helps you not be hit or interrupted during the charge time. The unenhanced version of this ability has a decent amount of base damage, decent coverage, decent signature charge generation, decent overall, right? It's very sluggish to use, and when enhanced deals more damage and stuns for longer than the base version of this does. A stun unfortunately is not a status effect in this game, so you can't spread it with a Pandemic Pouch. Overall, it's not a very useful status effect either, it doesn't really work into bosses all that well either, right? Overall, this ability it just feels like it came from a different game. It tries to copy Flame Strike, but it fails at all the points, even though it does deal a decent amount of damage. Since it does deal a decent amount of damage, it's gotta go into decent tier here overall. That's all I can really tell you. You can't really make this excel at anything. It's not gonna be great, it's not gonna be horrible, it's just alright. Just get it enhanced. That's my recommendation here. Let's talk about something a lot more exciting related to the Spark Contact Arcana at the top of S tier here, which will be Bolt Rail, a held, undefined basic Arcana. Not melee, not projectile. However, pretty much just as busted as Spark Contact, even though you can't actually slap a Dark Katana on this thing. Why so? Well, combo gloves are amazing with this one, especially when enhanced. They add a ton of damage, a ton of versatility, a ton of coverage. Evening gloves are just positively completely insane as you hold this ability down. It ticks many times, and Evening Gloves just make it tick much faster and make it deal damage much faster, enable you to use it more frequently, enable you to use other abilities on it more frequently and faster. So this thing is just so freaking good versatility wise. You want to have it. Candies, for the aforementioned reason, this thing just ticks like a motherfucker, so candies are gonna add a ton of extra damage, even without a Fueled Berserk, which is coincidentally next on the list. Fueled Berserk is incredible on this ability. It's like having 10 Evening Gloves at once. So freaking good. Magnetic Follow-Up, Lightning Aspect, and Quantum Edge are all insane abilities that work exceptionally well, pretty much only on this particular ability, as it ticks very often. That means it will proc all three of these effects very frequently. It also ticks quite fast, so in retrospect to the lightning aspect, once you already have acquired the item Evening Gloves or a Fueled Berserk, Arcana lightning aspect gets a lot better on this ability too. Although my absolute favorites here are Magnetic Follow-Up and Quantum Edge. Although you can use these abilities, these sort of basic Arcana support abilities that add a ton of extra damage, you can definitely use them. You can make a point for all of the abilities on this tier list. Some of them will inevitably be a lot more viable, and Bolt Rail is the most viable out of all of these from my personal experience and my personal experience anyway, and I love that. While it may essentially just be a carbon copy of the Spark Contact Arcana, even though there are a lot of differences here in terms of the categorization, for example, in terms of the range, in terms of the animation, damage wise and tool wise, this thing is a one-on-one carbon copy of Spark Contact, but this thing is so much more versatile in how you approach using it, which I personally prefer. I love versatility. It's my absolute end-all be-all in any given build. Sidewinder's Badge, lastly, is going to be just as insane as on a Spark Contact. You hit 1 billion times every time you use this. You hold it down, and you just dealt hundreds of damage to your foes. This thing is crazy good. Let's get into the specifics, though. When unenhanced, it has a very high amount of base damage, incredible, with Fueled Berserk against knockback immune targets. Who would have known? It has rather poor coverage, actually, as it is a narrow line skill shot, essentially, at range, albeit not a very long range. It grants you a great amount of signature charge, which kind of makes a lot of sense for this one. And most importantly, unlike Spark Contact, it is much easier to use. It kind of forces you to stand still and just choose a direction, and into that direction you cast this narrow lightning beam, which will shock all enemies and just fry them in front of your eyes. So while it may not be as damage heavy as Spark Contact overall, it is definitely heavier on crowd control, as you can shock large groups of enemies. Enemies of an infinite amount, an infinite quantity, really, if you want to. And you're gonna do decently well, unlike with the Spark Contact. When enhanced, this ability gains a lot more coverage and shocks enemies, and it looks very cool with that fat explosion. I really like it. It's super strong. I still believe it's worse than Spark Contact overall. It doesn't feel as great having to stand still as well while using it, so I will rank it below Spark Contact, directly below it, however. Volt Disc is next on our list. Volt Disc is a tapped projectile basic Arcana. It works decently well off of Evening Gloves, especially when enhanced. Reinforced Braces are a neat addition occasionally. Chaos Visor can help its a little bit lackluster or too average, too mediocre damage. And likewise can Candies help you use this as a sort of main damage tool, or as a better helping tool. The unenhanced version has a decent amount of base damage, a decent amount of coverage, but it lacks width. Although it can hit multiple targets, very similarly to the final hit of the stone shot, but essentially you're always shooting the final hit of a stone shot, which kind of sounds cool, but in practice it doesn't feel as fun as using a stone shot. I like the tiny pebbles way more than I like the one larger hit from Volt Disc. Now, for Volt Disc, it also grants you a decent amount of signature charge generation. It can be tricky to use aim or hit, unless you enhance it, in which case, yeah, that'll be a lot easier, as you just throw out this projectile at a rather wimpy range, and if it doesn't connect, its width can kind of betray you occasionally. If it doesn't connect, it doesn't connect. Just throw out more. It's nothing special, you just throw out discs of current, really. When enhanced, it deals much more damage and has great coverage, as it will bounce between enemies. It won't ricochet back and forth, it can't hit the same enemy more than once, but it will essentially magnetize other enemies and just seek them throughout the room. It's like a missile, a guided missile, so to speak, guiding itself. Which I like. That's creative. You can't really do a lot with that besides hitting 2 enemies across the entire room, essentially. So this thing it's essentially just decent with a gimmick, so to speak. It's definitely better than Radiant Blast, as it is certainly a lot faster, so that allows for more candy plays and the likes. But I wouldn't put a Fueled Berserk on this and I'd be great, for example. This thing is still gonna be quite decent at best. Let's move on to Ice Dagger, an ability I personally find myself loving more and more the more I use it. It's a held melee basic Arcana. Combos up exceptionally well with combo gloves, especially when enhanced. Evening gloves are quite alright, so you can tap this very viciously. Flat Gauntlet definitely works, as this is essentially like a double or triple cleave, so hitting a bunch of projectiles with a Flat Gauntlet is pretty much guaranteed every time you use it, although it's not a necessity, it's just a nice helper. Candies are alright. They add a little bit of girth, a little bit of range to this melee ability, which is nice. Dark Katana can definitely be useful, especially when enhanced for that large fat hit. It's a lot of extra damage added. Fueled Berserk, you could use... Oh, sorry. I am just noticing I am reading off of the wrong list. I was actually going to talk about Ice Dagger. Right. Let's talk about Ice Dagger next. Ice Dagger is a held melee basic Arcana. Ice Dagger pairs up exceptionally well with combo gloves for a little bit of extra damage, evening gloves so you can just stab the ever-living crap out of your foes, which is super duper strong, Flat Gauntlet so you can occasionally destroy the projectiles flying your way that would otherwise cancel you out, and straight up just go full ham, but that's really the only reason I would pick a Flat Gauntlet here. It's specifically for countering bosses and mini bosses. Candies are absolutely insane on this one. Likewise is a Dark Katana, as it may not feature the greatest amount of base damage, but with the Dark Katana and the frequency of hits on this ability, this can quickly turn into an explosion worth of DPS, right? So freaking strong. Fueled Berserk is incredible. You turn into the definition of a stabby crabby or stabbo crabber with this one. It's super duper overpowered. Slapping a Fueled Berserk on this one, very similar to both Bolt Ray and Spark Contact at the top of S tier, and definitely mention worthy. Evading Zephyr is a lot more useful, however, than on a Spark Contact or even a Bolt Ray, whatever the hell you would want to do that, because this ability allows for you to essentially freely move around however you want to. So Evading Zephyr is going to gain a lot more value out of this ability, even when you're using its base form. Sidewinder's Badge, lastly, is definitely noteworthy too. While you may not be hitting as frequently, or while it doesn't feel like you're hitting as frequently as on a Bolt Rail or a Spark Contact, you still hit enemies incredibly quickly, especially with your final goal of a Fueled Berserk plus Evening Gloves or a combo glove. So Sidewinders adds a ton of extra damage to your overall damage count. The unenhanced version of this ability has a very high amount of base damage, incredible yet again with Fueled Berserk against knockback immune targets. It, however, has a very poor coverage, probably even poorer than the other two contenders up in this list, because you quite literally only stab enemies with a dagger. It doesn't have width in front of your character whatsoever, whereas you could consider both Bolt Rail and Spark Contact to be sort of a cleave, especially Spark Contact, more so a cone shaped ability, and Bolt Ray is sort of a cone but also mostly a line, I suppose, depends on whether you have enhanced it or not. Ice Dagger, straight up, it's just a line in front of your character, very narrow line, definitely won't hit enemies even slightly aside from you, or slightly not in a straight up 90%, in a straight up 90-degree angle or opposite of you. So it's very easy to get circled using this. And that's kind of the only drawback of using this ability. It's not that easy to use overall. The great signature charge generation makes up for a lot of its lost value, and in that it is essentially yet another carbon copy of these two in terms of its raw power level. I would say it is easy to use once you've gotten used to the lack of range. Since it does also grant you a great amount of mobility, you can essentially completely freely move around while using this thing, and at a great pace as well. That kind of balances out the struggle of connecting this to enemies without being hit yourself. When enhanced, additionally, it deals a lot more damage, has a lot more range as well, as you shoot out 2 of your daggers, which is nice, especially with combo gloves. I really love towards that. It's just such a different take on an otherwise quite bland ability. And it grants you more coverage, of course, right? With the extra range and the extra possibilities comes extra responsibility and extra versatility. This ability is very, very strong, definitely stronger than Air Spinner, definitely on a level with these abilities up here. I wouldn't necessarily say it's better than Bolt Rail. I would say these are around the same level. While Ice Dagger can deal a lot more damage due to its melee trait, due to its melee categorization rather, slapping a Dark Katana on it. Dark Katana is not guaranteed, and additionally, if you were starting out with the Dark Katana, of course, it is still quite rough to use in rooms occasionally. While you can stand still while using this or just move around like a lunatic, generally that's not going to add a lot to your user experience to clearing large groups of enemies, and you're not going to be using it as your main tool for that, whereas the Bolt Rail is just way better for doing rooms additionally, and therefore can carry your runs way harder, more frequently, I would say, than the Ice Dagger. Let's move on to Riptide, which is a tapped projectile basic Arcana, which pairs up alright with Evening Gloves, pairs up alright with Reinforced Braces. I actually kind of like that quite a lot, yeah. And Fueled Berserk is pretty much the most well-known combination here with this ability, the most well-known synergy, rather, I should mention. When unenhanced, this ability has a decent amount of damage. I would probably even call it a poor amount of base damage. It at a decent coverage, definitely, but that's about all good I can really tell you about this ability, because the huge drawback here is it doesn't grant you signature charge, pretty much, right? It grants you very, very tiny, minute amounts of signature charge. It is incredibly clunky and sluggish to use, probably clunkier than the freakish Battle Axe over here, because similarly to the Battle Axe, you're essentially forced to stand still and wait out an animation, which is so annoying. It is incredibly annoying. As a balance tool, I'm assuming it does have a decent amount of projectile destruction out of the gates, and when enhanced, it has much more coverage and therefore much better projectile destruction. But even with all the projectile destruction in the world, it feels so clunky and so shit to use. It deals horrendous damage, and I really cannot stand it. This is at least going in below average, although to me personally this is going all the way down here. I'm not sure. To me personally it's even worse than the Severing Slash. Is it called Severing Slash? I think this is Severing Slash. Kind of a tough choice. To me personally, I would probably never even use Riptide. I would just delete it from the game entirely. I would actually personally prefer using Severing Slash, but objectively I feel like Riptide is slightly better than Severing Slash at dealing damage and controlling crowds, as you always get the same range. You always get the same boo for your buck, so to speak, whereas with the Severing Slash it's not guaranteed, as I have to charge up, and candies are a lot easier to use on Riptide, I would imagine, than on Severing Slash. Alright, moving on to Frost Blade. I love this one. This is super duper cool. Such a great ability. The more I use it, the more I fall in love with it. This might be my second favorite ability in the game. Maybe even my favorite basic Arcana in the game. It's very debatable though. It is a charged melee basic Arcana. That means it combos up. It combos up, I'm already saying. It synergizes very well, innately well, I would say, with combo gloves, especially when enhanced. Combo gloves are an absolute S tier item on this particular ability. I love it so much. This combination is just so creative, such fun. I love it. Chrono Glove obviously works quite well here too, and the blades, the Frost Blade, start struggling on floor 3 and above, so Chrono Glove is sort of mandatory if you want to use it as your main damage tool. If you want to continue on looping, for example, I would definitely recommend grabbing a Chrono Glove. It's not really going to get much more usable otherwise. There is not really another way. Even with the Evening Gloves, which is quite a great tool for the early and mid game, so you can tap it a lot more frequently or even hold it down if you want to. After all, since it makes the first 2 hits faster, it'll get you the charged blast much faster as well. So Evening Gloves is quite fun, but Chrono Glove is quite mandatory if you want to play a very long one on this particular ability. Flat Gauntlet is quite great with this ability too, as it is essentially just 2 very wide cleaves in front of your character, maybe even 3 if you get all 3 blasts off. So Flat Gauntlet is super duper strong with this one. It will definitely catch a lot of projectiles in your wake, and I love it. It's very, very good. Dark Eternal, lastly, is also quite strong, as you deal a very respectable amount of damage without a Dark Eternal. Adding a Dark Eternal on it, we've had it, you know it. It adds a ton of stuff additionally. The unenhanced version of Frostbite has a decent amount of base damage, great coverage, decent signal charge generation, and it is rather easy to use, can even be tapped for quick stuns, similar to the Flame Strike, which is very nice, and the tapped ability doesn't even look half bad. It looks like an actual individual ability. Additionally, now, for my favorite point, and the point why I love this thing, why I adore this thing, and the particular synergy with Combo Glove so much, the Final Blast freezes enemies. On the enhanced version, already, this thing is so cool, it looks so cool, and it feels amazing to freeze enemies. It buys you a lot of time, so you can move around, wait on your cooldowns to tick down, reposition, try another attack, charge up another blast, refreeze enemies, and then rinse and repeat until they die. When enhanced, the enhancement adds a lot more damage, a lot more coverage, and an even longer freeze. I love this thing. To Death and Beyond, to me personally, it's absolute top of S tier. Unfortunately, objectively, unless we are counting fun-wise, this thing, from its power level, it's gotta go somewhere into A tier. Probably around here, I would say, maybe even a little lower, probably rather here, since the Frostblade can't actually be effective. It can be very effective when combining it with a lot of candies and when slapping the obligatory Fueled Berserk or Evading Zephyr combination on it. Either of them are not very powerful on the Frostblades, since the base hit here, which would be the main ability when using Fueled Berserk, is not very impactful. And all the other buffs like Lightning Aspect, for example, are not very powerful either, as they break the freeze from the Final Blast, so they effectively render that useless. Unfortunately, it is worse than some of these other abilities. It is still a great ability, and in my heart, it will forever remain in S tier. Moving on to Aqua Arc, which is a held projectile basic Arcana, which combos up decently well with Combo Gloves. It is yet again a carbon copy of the Fire Yo-Yo, and essentially carbon copy of some other abilities like the, I like to call it X Strike, or the Vine Strike or Stone Shot. Most of these held abilities work very similarly, and Aqua Arc is literally just a carbon copy of Fire Yo-Yo, but it's the water/ice version of it. So Combo Gloves add a lot of extra damage. Unlike with the Fire Yo-Yo, they can add a ton of extra damage, not just a little bit of extra damage. Evening Gloves also add quite a lot of damage, so you can use this one a lot faster. I like that, it makes you more versatile, more flexible in how you approach things. Reinforced Braces are alright with this one. I like them a lot less than on the Fire Yo-Yos, but you can still build them if you want to. Candies work very well. I use this frequently as my main damage tool in builds, for the reason of it having an amazing enhancement. Fueled Berserk, likewise, is incredible. I absolutely love it, and you could even arguably make a point for Sidewinder's badge, although I haven't personally tried that out a whole lot, so I can't give my refined opinion on that. The unenhanced version has a very high amount of base damage, decent coverage, great signature charge generation, surprisingly great compared to the Fire Yo-Yos and the Stone Shard Arcanas. It is somewhat hard to use, I'd say. The projectiles should be hit at both apexes, preferably, which is really not that easy. Just hitting projectiles at one apex, it's just not that easy. It is very similar, it suffers from a similar problem as technically the Fire Yo-Yo, but also X Strike, as it tries to hit enemies within a certain shape, but aiming in like a shape pattern is not the easiest thing in the world by any means. So Aqua Arc, as a result of that, it kind of suffers from the same issue. I would say it's arguably harder to hit than the Fire Yo-Yo. Fire Yo-Yo feels like it's a lot more narrow, a lot more concise, more like a line skill shot, whereas the Aqua Arc actually feels like I'm hitting in an oval shape almost. So not that great ease of use, I'd say. However, it offers decent projectile destruction coming out of the gates. And when enhanced, it deals a lot more damage, has a lot more coverage, it essentially explodes in a bunch of ice damage. That means this thing is not only enabled by all water supporters, but also by ice support, which is absolutely fantastic. I really want to put this in S tier. I wouldn't say it is S tier, it doesn't work incredibly well with Fueled Berserk. It definitely works to a degree where you could debate on this potentially being S tier, but similarly does the Stone Shot Arcana, as Sidewinder's badge actually adds a ton of damage for this one, whereas Sidewinder's might be great for Aqua Arc. I haven't personally tried that out a lot. I don't know, I can't judge. Until I know, I can't really judge. If Sidewinders were incredibly powerful on the Aqua Arc, I would probably put it all the way up to low S tier. This thing is just very versatile and super duper strong, but only really when enhanced. When you don't enhance it, it is still very strong, it's great, but it's definitely not quite S tier. It's not gonna take the run and bring it home by itself. Let's move on to the final element here, which is Chaos, starting things off with the most exciting ability in terms of the basic Arcana category here, probably for a lot of people if I had to guess. Chaos Reaper. Oh hell yeah, the cool ass scythe. Chaos Reaper is a charged melee basic Arcana. It is exceptionally powerful with combo gloves, of course, and the chrono gloves, so you can use the final blast a lot more frequently, which is in and of itself very, very powerful. Evening gloves as well, so you can tap this a lot more frequently. Unlike abilities like the Flame Strike, for example, which is already very, very great. It's a great example for how you could take a charged ability and make it feel amazing in any given situation. This is even better. Even when tapping it, as it deals just so much damage, you can fully crowd control large groups of enemies just tapping this, never actually charging it all the way through. It is also quite versatile in how you actually approach the charge here, unlike with the Flame Strike, which kind of leaves you stuck in place as well. The Chaos Reaper Arcana additionally is great with Flank Gauntlet, so you can just straight up while tapping away destroy all projectiles, as it is yet another large cleave ability, and Fueled Berserk is quite fun. It's kind of the epitome of Lumberjack plus Raging Boxer plus Stabby Krabby, right? It's super duper fun to use. You are Death Incarnate or Death Enraged, and it's just so freaking good with these items. But the most important part here for this particular ability are not item synergies, I would say, but instead the base stats, the raw power of this ability, because it features a high amount of base damage, great coverage, great signature charge generation, which is already very outstanding. It's easy to use additionally and can be tapped for quick stuns, and it features a decent amount of projectile destruction, not signature charge destruction, especially on the final hit, but also when combining it with a Flank Gauntlet. This thing is very powerful. It applies the debuff, the chaos debuff, whatever it may be called. I'll just call it Shadow Flame or something for now, so enemies will take a lot of damage afterwards and be stun locked additionally to you already slamming into them afterwards. It's just so freaking good. This has gotta go into S tier, although I'm not personally a massive fan of this ability. It's just so freaking good. I wouldn't say this is necessarily better than Air Spinner though, because here's the kicker: when using this with a Field Berserk, while it does deal a great amount of damage, while it does move you around a ton, so you can slap Evading Zephyr and whatnot on it, it doesn't, similarly to a Flame Strike plus Field Berserk, it doesn't feel all that great. It doesn't deal all that much damage, it doesn't actually put in that much work. It does merely grant you a massive amount of crowd control. But for single target killing potential, as with bosses for example, even in the optimal setup, Chaos Reaper is simply not going to be better than any of these four right here. It's at best going to be comparable to Flame Strike, and I would personally say it is the superior Arcana of the two, but that debate is up to you. Chaos Crusher is next on the list. I love this thing. It's a held melee and projectile basic Arcana. That means you can slap both a Dark Katana or a Chaos Visor onto it, and you're gonna get a ton of extra bonuses, a few extra disadvantages, but mostly bonuses thrown your way over the course of your run. This thing automatically qualifies for at least A to S tier, just reading that. Now, in terms of valuable synergies, we have a long list to work through here. Combo gloves are very fun with this ability, as since it is both melee and projectile, you have a melee part in front of your character or around your character, and then a projectile that you lob at quite a large distance for basic Arcana. So with combo gloves, you just lob an extra projectile, do an extra melee hit. That's a ton of extra damage, a ton of extra flexibility, and therefore super valuable. Evening gloves likewise are quite useful for both using this as a ranged poke ability or as a full-on I will hit you with both melee and ranged until you're dead type of ability. Very strong. Reinforced braces, in cases of you using this for utility, for destroying projectiles, for piercing enemies, for using it as ranged poke, is quite great. You could also make a point for the Flat Gauntlet, although I don't personally enjoy using that on this particular ability. It does definitely work though. You could also do both. Put in double the projectile destruction, that's amazing. Candies work like a treat. When focusing both the melee and ranged part on the same enemy, i.e. the enemy is right in front of you, and you add candies, you get insane amounts of base damage that most abilities can only dream about. Dark Katana additionally and Chaos Visor are fantastic for adding extra damage to the individual parts of the ability. Field Berserk is fantastic both when using this as ranged tool or simply for ditching out the largest amount of possible damage, or using it as crowd control tool, whether at range or in melee range. Sidewinder's Badge lastly is very self-explanatory. You hit enemies twice every time you cast this, with the Shadowy Ball and the second Shadowy Ball, the AoE in front of your character. So Sidewinders naturally adds a ton of extra damage. This thing by default deals a very high base damage, incredible damage with Field Berserk against knockback immune targets, you know the drill. It has a decent coverage, although I would argue it's a great coverage. It's essentially just melee cone in front of you and a narrow line skill shot. So for versatile players, for players who've played for long periods of time, this ability has great coverage overall. It's super duper versatile. But for a new player, it's only going to be decent coverage at best. It grants you a great amount of signature charge, which is fantastic. Love to hear that from a Chaos ability. Totally not broken or anything. It's very easy to use and very versatile. And it grants you a poor amount of projectile destruction right out of the gates, and allows for you to combine it with both of the gloves for a lot of projectile destruction potential anyway on this ability. This is a fantastic ability. I find it comparable to Stone Shot, although Stone Shot hits more frequently and is slightly less versatile. If you gave Stone Shot more range, it would essentially just be a carbon copy of this ability, although not enhanced. Keep that in mind that Chaos abilities come enhanced and cannot be unenhanced. So I will put it at the top of A tier. I don't feel like it is quite S tier. While you could make a good point that with a Fueled Berserk and Candies, it comes very close to the power of these four right here, these top of the line candidates. I don't personally feel like it does put in that much work against large groups of enemies. It definitely feels great into single targets. Yep, absolutely, it's all the way up here. But against large groups of enemies, you have to be tricky, you have to be smart in how you move around, how you try to line them up overall. So I can't possibly rank it great in any given situation, in any given build. Okay, Phantom Division is our final ability in the game here for the category of Basic Arcana. Phantom Division is a held undefined Basic Arcana. You know what that means. It's already sitting at probably B or below, just looking into that. Notable synergies include combo gloves, which are actually decently useful for this ability, and evening gloves, so you can simply use it more frequently, though I personally prefer the combo gloves, and Fueled Berserk, which isn't even that great, even though this is a chaos ability. As this ability deals very poor base damage at a poor coverage, it is held, sort of. It does feel more like a tapped ability. At times, when you add a Fueled Berserk, this is essentially just a held ability, but power level wise, it just doesn't sit right with me. It feels like a bouncing blaze, this one right here, but much more underpowered at a much shorter range, unable to handle large groups of enemies. Totally grants you poor amounts of signature charge generation. For all of that payoff, this is not that easy to use after all, which is my next point. It is technically easy to use, as it kind of auto-targets enemies. You just have to touch enemies with this rogue lunging forward, and then they will do the rest for you. But since you have to tap away quite a lot, it doesn't have a long duration, it doesn't keep them busy for long, you have to position yourself quite well. Generally speaking, this is easy to use, but the longer you take your run, right? The longer your run goes on for, the worse this is going to become, and the more horrendous the ease of use of this particular ability will become. Therefore, I will at least rate it below average. Personally, I feel like it is still better than Obsidian Splitter, because Splitter is just that freaking hard to make use of. But as someone who barely ever uses this ability, I would probably put it either here or straight up like right here. I feel like it is really that bad. And that concludes our tier list. Leave me your opinions behind in a comment or wherever, really, and let me know what your favorite abilities in this game are. You know mine, my basic Arcana anyway, are Air Spinner and Frostbite. I love these to the death. Aqua Arc also is insanely fun. I love this one so much when enhanced. When unenhanced, but when enhanced, this thing is insane fun. And until next time, goodbye.